I met Clive originally in rehearsals for the school play at Quarry Bank High School in Liverpool. So my first experience of him was as an actor. He was already at school writing, directing, starring in, and hand-drawing the posters for his own productions, which were with titles like Voodoo and Inferno, not so many million miles away from the work that everybody identifies him with now. So that vast and restless imagination and the dark side of that imagination was evident really as soon as you knew him.
I was very impressed by him and by the work and the quality of the stuff. And we became friends, and I met his family and all that kind of thing. And he came to see me doing various things in the theatre. And that was partly why I think I was cast in Nightbreed, because he saw me doing quite an extreme character in what we call a pantomime in England. Narcisse is a great part because it allows the actor to have fun. And this was a show in which I had a lot of fun, so he knew I liked having fun.
The first time I met Clive, I'd been doing a production of King Lear in London, at drama school actually. And I was very lucky because the part I was playing of the Fool, the director had played the Fool for the Royal Shakespeare Company, so he knew my part inside out, and gave me loads and loads of insight into the nuances of the character. Clive came along to see the production, liked it, and asked to meet me afterwards. And we became friends after that. And when I graduated from drama school, he asked me to join the Dog Company, which was the fringe theatre company that he'd set up with Doug Bradley when they moved down from Liverpool.
We did productions that we took a year to put together and improvised and rehearsed and were then performed once. We became a mime troupe briefly. And we put together a commedia dell'arte version of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which was actually very successful. One of the most successful things that we did in Liverpool. The words crept back in again. We moved down to London by degrees. The Dog Company was formed, and we were doing original plays by Clive, which are all published now, so people will probably know them. The History of the Devil, in which I played the devil, Frankenstein in Love, which I played Dr. Frankenstein, and The Secret Life of Cartoons, in which I played a giant rabbit.
We went up to the Edinburgh Festival, we went over to Holland, we did work at the Cockpit Theatre in London. But after a while, we realised that we needed to make some money from our art, which we weren't really doing in a fringe company. You have to pay the bills, you have to eat. So they disbanded the company, and I didn't see Clive for a couple of years after that. Although he very kindly wrote a play for me called Crazy Face, which was put on at the Cockpit. But sadly, I couldn't do it because I'd just got some work. One of my big regrets, to be honest.
And that kind of brings us up to the early 80s. The Dog Company had kind of run its natural course. Clive had started writing some short horror stories, quote unquote, to see if I can make a bit of money. Seemed to work. So at that point, our paths kind of diverged a bit. I was working as a jobbing actor in repertory theatre up and down the country. Clive was then principally writing.
I rang Clive out of the blue just to see how he was, and he just had a couple of screenplays made into movies, but he wasn't very happy with how they turned out. So he persuaded the producers to let him write and direct the next one, and that turned out to be Hellraiser. And I just happened to ring him at the right time, and he said, "Oh yeah, hi Si, I'm just about to make this movie. Do you want a part?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "It'd be a monster," and he said there might be a little bit of makeup, and I thought, fine.
I remember reading The Hellbound Heart, and then probably 1985 would be the first time that Hellraiser came over the event horizon. We were talking, and Clive said, "Oh, by the way, I'm trying to put together a low-budget, independent British horror film, and I think there might be something in there that you'd be interested in."
The next thing I knew, I found myself down at the studios of Image Animation, having the head done. And the makeup, when we finally got down to doing the screen tests on the makeup, that was my first experience of what a nightmare the whole thing was going to be. There were no eye holes in the makeup because the character's eyes were sewn up. There were no ear holes because his ears had been cut off. And there were no nose holes. So that was bad enough. And then they had these false dentures that were glued on top of my own teeth, which meant that my mouth was constantly open. So the only way of breathing was through my mouth, which was constantly filling up with saliva. So I was constantly doing this. And we were glued into it with surgical super glue for anything up to 14 hours a day. So it was quite a distressing experience, to be honest, because there's a lot of time hanging around on a film set where you normally chat and read books and read the newspaper, do the crossword. And of course, all I could do was sit with my own thoughts.
So we shot Hellraiser in 86, which was released in 87. In 88, we were at Pinewood shooting Hellbound, which was released in 89. And then we were almost immediately back at Pinewood in the spring of 89. Only, I think, about 3 or 4 months after Hellbound had been released, starting to film Nightbreed.
I'd known Nick Vince from drama school. He also was at the same drama school, and obviously I knew Doug from the Dog Company. And I found that they got the call for their casting. So, and I was a little bit surprised because I hadn't heard anything. So I started kind of pushing and contacting Clive. And again, it was just the right place at the right time. Mark Almond was originally cast as Onaka in Nightbreed, but he just signed with Sony Records. So they pushed for him to leave, and I got the role after him. So yeah, I was second choice, sadly. It's just no good for the ego.
Before I did Nightbreed, I had heard about Hellraiser. Everybody was, making a big to-do about it. And then I remember Stephen King did an interview, and he said, "I've seen the future of horror, and it's Clive Barker," which pretty much made him an overnight star. I had just done a play in LA, just won the Drama Desk Award for it, and I believe one of the producers had seen me and suggested he meet me for Boone because that role was very intense and emotional and real out there. And so I just went up to Clive's hotel room and did one scene for him, and he said, "Here, take the book with you." And I took the book with me, and they called the next day and said, "We want to bring him over to London. We like him for Boone." So it's pretty simple for me.
I had known of Hellraiser, of course, and had read Books of Blood, which I loved. But I didn't really know Clive or his background in theater or his collaborative spirit until I actually first met him at my audition. I think I had read part of Cabal and was really quite taken with it. Then I got the script to Nightbreed and finished Cabal immediately. So I guess I had started Cabal, gotten the script, read Cabal, did the movie. Yeah.
It was interesting because I actually read the book before I read the script. I didn't read the script. When I went up to meet Clive, I didn't have much time, so I looked over the scene enough where I wouldn't have to hold a paper while I was attempting to read the scene. And then it happened so quickly that I basically didn't read the script until I took Cabal on the plane with me, read that, and then I read the script. So I loved the book, and the original script, not the original movie, but the original script was very true to the book. So I loved that too. I mean, it's a great acting role.
The role of Shuna Sassy came to me through David Glass, who did the choreography for at least the part of the film that I worked on. Let's see, Boone's dream sequence. David Glass, the choreographer, was responsible for the beautiful movement in those scenes. And I had been studying physical theater and mime with him and just taking classes with his company. It was great. I was very much at the end of my dance career and moving towards yoga teaching and going back to school to get a degree.
She believes in this person she is in love with, and she will go through hell or high water to save this person she's in love with. And to that end, where her heart is concerned, she's very fearless. She's a hero.
To me, Boone is every man in the sense that he's a pretty normal guy. When the story starts out, he's a guy who works. He's a blue collar worker. He lives his life, and he's the normal person who's thrown into the magical world, and doesn't really want any of it. He doesn't ask for it; it comes to him. So I think that's what's so relatable about him, and also Anne-Marie Bobby's character, is that there are normal people who get thrust into this world, and I think the neat thing is their first reaction is what anybody's first reaction would be, is fear, and along the way they find out that what we have to fear isn't necessarily the monster but the man.
The supernatural is sort of human shorthand for what we want to believe is out there or are afraid is out there, when the truth is, at least metaphysically speaking, there's as much energy in you and in me as there is between you and between me. And I work a lot with dogs, and one of the things that fascinates me is how much more dogs and other animals and other living creatures rely on their senses in ways that we do not. In ways that we've sort of tuned out of. What we can't hear, what we can't smell, what we can't taste, that other living creatures do. And, the fact that we, with our rational brains, turn that into a facet of the supernatural, when it's truly just our reticence to understand what's already here.
When I do a role, I don't find myself discussing who our characters are with another actor. I think what we usually find is, how do we fit together as the characters that we're going to bring into this, which means you meld. You find a way to meld personally, and that becomes part of the melding of the characters.
Clive talked about Death in Venice, the film Death in Venice, and the passion that the man has in that for the boy, and he talked about the boy. He also gave me a list of, I think, 6 or 7 other movies. Of course, this was way before the day of the internet, so trying to find these, they're all quite obscure. I remember looking in the local video libraries and things and trying to find them, but they weren't the kind of material you could find there. So Death in Venice was the only one I really found. But it was interesting having a role without a script. It was a great release, and it gave you loads of leeway. And I just think I found every day you go in and just take the day as it was, each day's filming, see what was being thrown at you, and try and go with the flow and react to what was happening. He
talked about the physicality of Shuna Sassy. He said that I needed to be in terrific shape and be very high energy and athletic and acrobatic, and that he was going to push me to the limits of my physical endurance. I can't say that really happened through the role. I was certainly pushed to the limits through having to be in makeup by 4 a.m. For me, being anywhere before 9 a.m. is pushing me to the limits of my physical endurance. But yeah, I mean, again, the role was described to me as she was very sensual, she was deadly, she was vicious but not evil.
The shorthand that was always in my head, and I think this was given to me by Clive, was for Lylesburg, was Moses. So he's the keeper of the tablets. He's the holder of the law. It shall be done this way and not that way is basically his modus operandi. But his concern, because the heart of Nightbreed, although this got completely lost, was that the monsters were the good guys and the humans were the monsters, and that the breed wanted nothing more than to be left alone, to be freaks in their quiet corner underneath the cemetery, and just leave us be. Thank you, we're perfectly happy.
Doug Bradley has known Clive for a very, very long time. They went to school together and had a theater company together. So I think one of the good things about having Doug around is you kind of have a half a Clive around. He knows kind of where Clive's coming from, and he has an inside look at things that I certainly didn't have, and that I think most of us didn't have. So there's a perspective that comes from Doug Bradley that you can kind of trust.
I know. First, I have to show you. That's how it works. Show me what? My true face. That's what these are for. I'm an actor, see?
Hugh Ross is just so lovely. He's such an awesome guy. We got to be friends, and the most thing about Hugh is just so much fun. We were talking one time, and we were talking about Shakespeare. You know, he's a Rodman. He's a serious Shakespearean actor. And he says, I always tell the young guys, don't take this seriously. This is fun. This is entertainment. And I thought, as a young actor, that was such a great thing to be told, because, you know, we all want to be so serious when we're young. We all want to be, you know, Brando and Dean. And I just thought that was such a cool thing to hear from such a classically gifted actor. And then he invited my girlfriend and I up to see him in Stratford-upon-Avon. And so I got to go up and see him do his Shakespeare, and he was still fun and magical.
He came up to see me in Stratford, and I always remember that I told him yesterday. He brought me a collection of Yeats's poetry and a pair of woolly socks in case it was cold in Stratford, which was really nice.
Working with David Cronenberg was it was very simple. You know, it was very simple. He would, you know, say his lines very simply. He really didn't try to act, which I think was a great benefit for him. You know, he didn't try to be evil. He didn't try to be arch. He played it very simply, and when you see it, it makes it all that much creepier that he played it so simply. And on top of that, we had a really good time just sitting around and talking about life and spirituality and things. He's a very interesting man.
I think David fit right in. You know, some people would say he was so weird. I think he was just game for anything. And just as so many of us had come from theater, and so many of us were writers, and so many of us were artists and dancers, we brought our A game, all of our collective, cumulative A games to each role we played. To that end, I think David brought all of his experience as a writer, as a director, as an actor to Clive's creative process. I felt like he was not so much spotlighted as anything but Decker. He was basically part of the company, and an interesting guy who talked about other things in life too, and that was part of the process.
Nightbreed was actually in the Guinness Book of Records for having the most monsters in any movie at the time. It's certainly the most monsters in any British movie. But I think it actually was in there for having the most monsters. So it's 300 monsters. It seems impossible now that anyone would put 300 monsters into one film, but they're all there. There are some long-term effects of the book, the Chronicles of the Nightbreed, that people who were just very young when Nightbreed came out, or even didn't see Nightbreed but saw the book, that got them wanting to be into makeup and makeup effects, and that got them into prosthetics. So a lot of times I've had people come up to me and go, "Oh, the things you did for Nightbreed, I've not seen the film, but the things you did for Nightbreed were so fantastic." And that's really nice and reassuring that we actually did that, all of that process, all of those trying to be different, not trying to be yet another portfolio piece that would just could be genetically stamped out of any shop, and constantly trying to actually be different and weird, really showed off and really played, and still has harmony today in other ways. I don't think actors have a fair idea of what wearing prosthetics really does. Right? A good prosthetics means that everything the actor does will come through and express on the outside. But they'll look up and look in the mirror, and the face they've always seen for their entire life won't be looking back at them. The monster will be looking back at them. And that has some interesting effects. It has some positive effects. There's some pretty, people get scared and freaked by effects as well. But the process nearly always starts off with a life cast, which in itself is a pretty horrendous process. We use a material called alginate, which is meant for casting your teeth for dental work. And it's kind of like, it starts off like a cold mousse. You keep it cold and you put it over the eyes and you work your way down from the top, comes over the eyes, and then you cover up the nose and they're still breathing through the mouth. You have them blow out through their nose and you clear the nose. Sometimes you put straws in there, but we didn't used to like putting straws because it used to distort them. We would just look at, and then you have them close the mouth, and then you go all the way around the entire face, covering their own face. So all they really have is 2 breathing holes. And as the alginate starts to set up, you have little bits of tape that you put into the alginate as it sets. It takes about 3 minutes to set. Then you can put plaster bandage on. And the plaster bandage you then fold into these little pieces of cloth so that the plaster bandage and the alginate will now stick together. They're usually wearing a bald cap because people don't like having stuff in their hair and it sticks. A good life cast will take something like 20 minutes. And you have to think that you're under that for a good amount of that time. So that process then gives you a negative of their face. And from that negative, you can pour plaster in. We use a very hard plaster called Cristacal or Ultracal. And the advantage of that is when it goes off, it's like really, really solid. You take off the outer cast and that original mould is then thrown away. And what you're left now with is a plaster cast. That plaster cast nearly always needs cleaning up. You need to clean up the line where the bald cap goes. You need to clean up cracks or something like that. So you have to work fairly quickly with that, because once this thing is set within a couple of hours, this is going to be like rock solid. You also don't want to make that cast solid all the way through with plaster because it'll overheat in the oven if you're using that. Sometimes you then take a mould off of that and take fiberglass out of that mould so that you end up with a fiberglass of the actor's face. And at that point, and only at that point, can you then start to sculpt on top. And the sculpting of prosthetics is a very difficult art because you're adding something to someone's face, but you don't want it to make the face look bigger. So you're constantly adjusting the thickness of the prosthetic as it's sculpted so that you're both working in believability, but also altering the shape enough to get the character you want through. You also have a lot of technical issues at that time where you have to think about blending edges and edges that will touch down and disappear eventually when they're made in whatever material you're making them out of. Then we used to use sometimes a plaster mould, most times a fiberglass mould off of that. And these moulds will have to be very cleverly designed so that when, at the time it was foam rubber was put in, there'd be a very, very, very thin cutting edge that would cut the foam off a point. So you'd have a little very, very, very thin blending edge where you'd be blending back to the skin. Nowadays you'd probably use silicone, but the process is still pretty much the same. Then those moulds would be cooked and baked out and washed, and all the chemicals were reduced from them. And then a multi-part foam liquid, so foam rubber. So you'd whip up foam and you'd put a curing agent in it and a gelling agent and other agents in it, so that this material would whip itself up and then it would gel. So you had a limited amount of time, and if it was too hot in the day, your rubber would all go off in the basin of the mixer, and you'd have the nightmare of pulling it all off of the whisk. So we had probably the first air conditioning in the UK. We don't need a lot of air conditioning in the UK, but when it gets warm, you can't run foam. So we had air conditioning. We had little mobile air conditioning units, and then this is pumped in, or it's painted into the mould, and then that process is then baked in an oven, and the foam then solidifies and stays. If you touch it when it's raw, it collapses in on itself. But once it's cooked, it becomes like a sponge. So it's now got the process of you touch it, it's got a memory, it comes back. That piece is very carefully removed off. It's then washed, because there are a lot of chemicals in the foam that you don't want on people's skin, and dried. and you have to be careful how you dry them. You can't just throw them in a tumble dryer. You have to put them into a pillowcase, or the preferred process, we have this old mangle, which is this 2 great big wooden rollers that were used in the turn of the century to squeeze out water, and you'd be feeding your prosthetics with paper towels through, and then having boxes and boxes full of wet paper towels to get rid of the water from washing them. And then you'd hang them out to dry, and then you'd repair them and fill in any places and make them all good. And then you would undercoat them with a base coat, you would seal them. And a lot of the times with Nightbreed for speed, we would pre-colour. So we would airbrush the basic colours on, so that when they were applied, just the blending edges had to be worked in. If you were lucky, that was the process. Sometimes you just had raw pieces and you had to do the whole thing from start to finish on the face. And then you'd have to stick it down to the actor. So this is where it gets tricky, because you've now got a human factor. That same person who all that time ago had that mould now has these thin pieces of latex stuck down to them, and we stick it down with a glue called Prostade, which has the ability to stick really strong. But you only really get a little time before it goes and it's down. So you have to be very careful where you put it down to make sure you don't ruin all the illusion. You work your way around, you blend the edges off, you seal the edges, you seal the piece when it's on the actor's face, and finally you colour and tone and match. And then there might be hair pieces or other things that go on top, and there might be contact lenses which go in the final end. The actor goes through hours. The average makeup on Nightbreed, I think, was about 3, maybe 4 hours. Some of the makeups took 9 hours to do. So you get them to a point where they become very tired, and they become, sometimes their heads are dropping and sleeping because you've come in so early to get them ready for the call. And then suddenly they're done. And the third AD's coming in and saying, we're ready to go on set now. And you've just about made it. You've just made it through to that point. And now you've got a day's shooting. Now you've got 12 hours. So you then gather up your makeup tools, you gather up your on-set kit, you take them down onto set. If you're on Nightbreed, you might leave them there and then go back to the workshop and do a full day's work in the workshop. And that goes on through the day. They need touching up. They need this horrendous dust removed from them all the time. You've got then the process of then is you have to, at the end of the day, everybody goes, okay, it's a wrap. And everybody else goes home. And you and that poor actor start the process of taking it all off. If you rip off a makeup off, you'll damage the skin. You'll actually literally physically take the top layer of skin and create wilts in it. So you very carefully have to use an oil that expands the foam. Slightly different when you're doing silicone pieces. But then you have to destroy that piece. So you end up with this piece that's big and puffy and useless, which you throw in the bin. And that was that one day's character. And that's the process. And then the next day you might do the same thing again. Start all over again.